It's running.
Back in the days when TJ was still managing the node list and assigning node numbers himself, there was a node south of San Francisco somewhere that a number of, we'd only been 2 or 3 weeks, I think, a month. There was one node people started complaining about because they never answered the phone. And read the log the next day, and there'd be 30 tries, and there'd be 30 no answers. And finally, TJ says, "Well, let me give it a call in the daytime by voicemail." So he gave him a call. And did he get an earful? There's this little old lady.
Yes.
I don't have any idea how old she was, but he said she sounded ancient, who every night at, what was it, about 3 in the morning, I guess, out in California. No, 1 in the morning out in California, 3 in the morning here. Every night, the phone would start ringing. And every 2 minutes it'd ring, or maybe every minute. And she was really getting mad. And so when TJ called her up and identified himself, oh, did she let him have it. She was about ready to call the police because she was being harassed. So he immediately did an edit in the node list and distributed a new node list to everybody by himself. I think he logged into boards and uploaded it because he wanted to get that number out of the node list right away.
Yeah, one of his most common examples when he's talking about problems with the node list that he encountered during the interview I gave with him was he kept making reference to, calling little old ladies at night. So I guess it actually comes from actual experience.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. It actually happened.
Yeah, he did not want to give it up, but I think his experiences and his one mistake after another mistake, and I don't know whether Tom is dyslexic, but he switched numbers around, and he had lots of, he'd misspell states and misspell boards.
And I think originally he envisioned FlightoNet as being his own little empire. And it wasn't until he realized that he just couldn't manage that empire alone that he needed some help. But
he liked the chaos.
We had to really browbeat him to get him to surrender the node list. He published the node list whenever he felt like it. So there was no way that you knew that a new node list was available. So he more or less had to send it to everybody.
Well, no, he put it on his board, but he did it whenever he felt like it.
Yeah, exactly. There's no way that you know that there's a new node list to go get.
And his board wasn't up all the time.
Right.
The only one that was up all the time was 51.
Right.
I mean, his board was down half the time while he was tinkering with something.
Yeah.
This is something I didn't check. Who's the first zone coordinator, for one?
Me.
Okay. You are. Okay, that's what I thought. All right. I didn't want to throw that fact
There,
out.
the term zone.
I don't know.
Really
I don't know if you ever were zone coordinator.
Yeah, there was no zone in the single net FidoNet. There was no zone in multi-net FidoNet. Zones didn't come about until we split the world into
About 87 or 88
Yeah.
that zones appeared. Ken was the first international coordinator. And I was the first international technical coordinator.
Yeah.
And when Ken started to burn out, he pleaded with me to take over international coordinator. And at that time, it was truly becoming international. And they had some kind of war going on down in Australia.
Yes.
And the two factions were calling Ken and bending his ear.
I would get calls
And-
every single
And
morning.
he finally said, I can't take it anymore. So he persuaded me to become international coordinator. And I said, no, wait a minute, I can't handle both jobs. So I got hold of Rugen and persuaded him to take on international technical coordinator. So you were the second ITC.
Yeah.
And I became the second IC.
But we had thousands of nodes on the node list by the time all that happened.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think we had just broken 1,000.
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
just about.
I mean, we went through a long period of time in
Yeah.
multi-net, FidoNet, and then
Yeah, the first version of the multi-net, he had doubled the capacity somehow, but he was still keeping the node list internally. And we went up to 500 nodes. And it didn't take more than 3 or 4 months to eat up 500 nodes. So his next version after that allowed for 1,200 nodes. And I think all he was keeping in memory then was region net and node number. And a pointer to the disk where the rest of the information could be picked up. And that gave us a capacity of 1,200 nodes. And when we got to Colorado Springs, we were rapidly approaching the 1,200 node limit.
and every time we did this, we had to freeze the node list.
And crisis,
And people,
because TJ had broken his hard disk. All he had was floppies, and he was trying to run a bulletin board and do software development on the damn floppies. And not only that, he was burning out about that time too, because he'd been putting out, I don't think ever a week went by that we didn't get an updated version of Fido. And frequently we were getting them daily and occasionally 2 a day.
I think about Colorado Springs, it ceased to be fun for him.
Yeah.
He felt an obligation to the community that he'd fostered. But he had to pay the rent. And he wasn't paying the rent. He couldn't buy that hard drive.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, sit there. Well, because we're bouncing back and forth about stuff here that counts for all three of you anyway, and stuff. And honestly, I just should be less lazy. The more people there are, the more I have to move the camera and make sure everything's getting the person and everything else. So there we go. That's great.
You just splice him in.
Yeah, well, that worked.
Hey, Gloucester, that's the story of my life. I had some guy interviewed in Colorado, and he had his kids stay home from school so he could listen to father talk about his BBS days. Kids lasted about 10 minutes. About 10 minutes, and behind me, they're starting to play a little macrame, and he's just like, just go up to your room, and the kids go up, and I'm like, anyway, so you were saying, now, there's, this Colorado Springs is the first.
It was Colorado Springs is when it became so political.
Yeah.
And that, now, IFNA was originally TJ's idea. In fact, he coined the phrase.
He came up with
International
it.
Phytonet
He came up with it.
Association.
I tell people that.
Back in '84, he was talking about an International Phytonet Association, and he wanted it so that he could distribute T-shirts and bumper stickers,
Right.
and that's about all he could think of
Right.
to use it for. And I wasn't terribly impressed with the idea. I don't know whether Ken was or not, but
Not a lot of T-shirt sales. No.
it wasn't.
My problem at that
It
point
wasn't
wasn't
until the-
T-shirt sales.
It wasn't until the spring of '86 that it finally became a requirement. Now the COSUG, Colorado Springs User Group, they were going to host a convention of phyto people. Well, actually, they invited a number of other bulletin boards, but phyto people were the only ones that turned up.
That's right.
And Ken was getting donations from various sources.
People were just sending me money.
He
Yeah.
had a fair
This
amount
was
of money.
after the Time magazine article, I think.
He had a fair amount of money in the.
and I was telling, and I think at that point, I don't know whether Phyto 51 was still at Data Research or whether I had taken it home, but I was actually spending money on mail and postage and long distance. So I was saying, look, this isn't all happening. I'm trying to get back to everybody, and I was asking, people to help.
But anyway, he had in the net bank account, which he kept separate, a fair piece of change. And the folks from Colorado, actually they were from Denver, but Colorado Springs wound up hosting the event. I'm not sure how that worked.
As a user group.
Yeah.
They contacted Ken and wanted to know if the Phyto folks would be interested in kicking in some money to help put this thing over and use its resources to publicize the event. That's probably why the Phyto folks were the ones that showed up.
Well, besides that, we had the mailing list, and we knew,
Yeah.
we had this big node list.
Yeah, we knew how to talk to people.
Yeah.
But,
We were the only bulletin board system that could talk
Right.
to people.
yeah. Two things occurred shortly after that. One, Ken filled out his taxes, and his accountant told him he was going to owe taxes on all the money he had collected in '85. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was a non-trivial amount, I'll tell you.
And it was insult to injury.
And
Well, I had to report it as income.
Exactly.
so that was one thing that suddenly, and he's already collected he'd already collected by April as much in '86 as he had in all of '85. And so he's getting jittery about that. And then the COSUG people come back and they said, hey, it looks like we're going to turn a profit on this deal. Would you like to share in the profit since you're shared in the costs? And Ken says, yeah, great. He says, well, there's one problem.
Yeah.
You've got to be a corporation or we can't distribute the money to you.
You have to be a not-for-profit, a 501c3.
Not as an individual, but you've got to be a not-for-profit corporation.
501c3.
Yeah. So we bit the bullet. Ken filled out the paperwork and we filed the paperwork.
But you
to
know what you
incorporate
have to
it.
do when you set up a corporation. You have to set up a structure, and you have to set up bylaws, and you have to set up an organization, and you have to have somebody in charge, and you have to have somebody who writes checks.
Board of directors.
And the minute all that started, I mean, TJ was already ballistic, and all of these sysops who are normally,
The big problem was there was a bunch of people, mostly on the West Coast, although there was one very vocal person down in Atlanta, that the word corporation really got their backs up. Corporations were for making money, and they didn't want anybody making money on them. Nobody was going to make a profit on them. And we kept trying to tell them we're talking about a not-for-profit corporation. There was a guy out on the West Coast that was always screaming on the...
Mikey.
No, the other one up in the Northwest.
Portland? Something in Portland?
Not Randy. There was a guy that was on the... I can't think of his name. But
There are tapes of the meeting where IFNA is announced, and Tom described, and I haven't gotten a copy of them yet. Mark Brennan has copies of them.
Yeah.
And it's described as an unstoppable shouting match.
yeah, there was that. That's what turned TJ off as much as anything. But this guy out in the West Coast kept trying to compare our commercial organization, because we were a corporation, to his favorite, the IRA. And I kept trying to explain to him not the IRA, the Rifle Association, NRA. He kept to the NRA. And I kept trying to explain to him that NRA is a corporation, fella, and the same kind of corporation as IFNA. It's a not-for-profit corporation.
Well,
although it is a organization that does lobbying, so you can't deduct your donations to it.
what broke the camel's back is when they, wrote the bylaws such that you had to join IFNA in order to be in the node list, and that just rubbed so many
bylaws that way.
I don't remember, but that was one of the things out in Colorado Springs that Henderson and a number of the others were trying to push through, and I think then after that didn't work, then they tried about 14 other ways, but there was just no good way to please the masses, this group.
It was herding cats on a national scale.
Yeah, essentially.
Going back to a subject I'd started and for some reason got sidetracked. We were talking about Tom Henderson, why everybody regarded him as evil. He and his wife and her brother were the officers of another corporation, System Enhancement Associates in New Jersey. And they were a software group, and they sold software commercially. And Tom, bless his heart, likes to make people think he's a lot more important than he is. So he was putting on the dog in Colorado Springs, buying rounds of drinks for people and whatnot, really throwing his money around. He put up a hospitality suite, sponsored a hospitality suite. Now, he was probably using his last nickel to do it, but people didn't see it that way. To them, he was a big organization, and they didn't appreciate his throwing his weight around and throwing the weight of his big corporation around. Well, they were three people. And later, during the ARC feud, Kat's organization was 5 people. So they were actually bigger than SEA. But the way it was viewed across the net was this big corporation, SEA, taking on this individual, Phil Katz. That's not the way it was at all. And Phil Katz, let's face it, stole the software. Well, when the lawsuit was in trial and things were going back and forth, the judge finally decided he wasn't going to hear anything he could count on to be true from either side. And the judge appointed an independent software expert to examine the sources for ARC and PKARC. And what he discovered was that, now PKARC postdated ARC. ARC was clearly ahead of, in dates. And what he discovered was, among other things, routine names were all the same. Yes, PKs were written in assembly language, where the others were written in C, but the names were the same. And the real corker, the comments.
Tom was
read word for word.
Comments. Mr. Katz's
complete with the misspellings. They were word for word identical in both of them. It was obvious that the software had been copied from ARC. So Tom won the lawsuit and lost the war.
Well, so did IFNA.
Because the underdog got trampled. And that probably was part of the demise of IFNA as well.
Well, but IFNA, I spent all the money that came into IFNA. I was, one individual. I had one P.O. box. I was spending it on postage. I was spending it on, some of it
phone calls
on corporation. I was doing absolutely nothing except for going out of my way to try to cross my T's, dot my I's, and do everything to properly set this organization up. Well, in the meantime, I got just absolutely, this guy is stealing money. He is, gonna send everybody down the tube, and he's taking FidoNet with him. It's horrible. It's miserable. We don't want it. We hate it.
We wanted to steal FidoNet.
Yeah.
We had created FidoNet, but that didn't count.
We'll pause it for.
Yeah.
You remember Chris, don't you?
Yeah.
Fireman from
He was
Florida.
Amazing.
So, depending on, if we want to pick up with Tom Henderson or if you want to pick up with IFNA's, one of the things I did really find in my research was the fact that, you get this, you have a.
I think we were talking about IFNA.
Yeah.
And we talked about the reason for its creation. And
actually, the inevitability of its creation.
And this was in the summer of '86. And then in August of '86 came the Colorado Springs confab. And that's when Ken and I realized how much hate and discontent there was over IFNA. We had no idea that there was that much dissent. Yeah, there was Mikey. We all knew about Mikey, but we thought Mikey was
An anomaly.
An anomaly, yeah. But it turns out 2/3 of the people at that gathering were anti-IFNA.
They were anti-establishment.
Well,
They didn't want any structure. They were more like what Jennings originally perceived. Of course, Tom wasn't any help.
And the guy who was running the conference was a lawyer from Denver. And he kept making speeches, and every time he opened his mouth, he made things worse. Yeah. He'd say things like, now, we don't mind letting Ken Kaplan put a few bucks in his pocket. And it's the last thing you want to say to a group like this.
Well, the whole thing...
Everybody out there just fumed and gets quieter.
You have quoted Tom exactly in his that's amazing.
What's that?
Just when I interviewed him a year ago, Tom said there was this little Weasley lawyer, and every time he opened his mouth, he
Right.
said the worst possible thing.
Yeah.
Tom also mentioned, by the way, a conversation that he had. I'll mention this now because why not? But just when Tom gives his speech that ends the meeting, the one where he comes down and, like, the one where he gives his anarchy talk, after he gets his award, I think this is the one we're talking about. Part of the reason for that was because he was brought up to a hotel suite with Tom Henderson and this lawyer. And they said to him, according to Tom, "We're going to get this thing through. We'd like it if you said yes, because if you say yes, it'll be much easier. But if you don't say yes, we're going to do it anyway, and then you're going to be shut out." So Tom has this conversation on his head when he goes to talk.
I didn't know that.
And so he was
Sounds like something Henderson might have said.
Yeah. Well, this was the lawyer guy. 'Cause Tom gets this
he
little
might have
cartoon
said that
steam
too.
over his head when he thinks about the lawyer guy. He likes Tom Henderson, you know.
I think that the guy probably tried to bring Tom Henderson for verisimilitude, and it was probably the lawyer whose idea it was. TJ's group at that time, and TJ had a clique with him, okay, saw themselves as the William Gibson Ice Age prototype hackers of the world unite, and that they were the living wave of what the computer system should be about, and there was no anything that spoke of structure or being responsible on a daily basis, like Ken was doing, and pumping the node lists out, week after week after week. They didn't want to hear about. It wasn't so much that they were upset that Ken was doing it. They liked that.
Yeah, they got a new node list every week, and usually it was accurate.
But the fact that somebody was doing it at all bothered them. They were perfectly willing to take the results. They wanted the results. But they didn't want to see that somebody actually had to do the damn work. And it certainly wasn't going to be them.
And they didn't want to know that any of that work required perhaps expenses.
Like, paying
Expenditures,
the phone bill.
like the phone bill and postage
Yeah.
and post office boxes and
Ken's phone bill at that time was monstrous because he was pushing the node list
Right.
out.
Call the
It's an extension of the
regional coordinators.
attitude of almost all BBS sysops, that it's their birthright to have free software. Any shareware that comes their way is theirs. They don't have to pay for it. They're running a BBS that distributes it, so they get it free. Well, the same concept extended to IFNA. IFNA is doing them a service, but they're doing IFNA a service. They're running their bulletin boards, and they're distributing the stuff that comes from IFNA to their users and whatnot, and they ought to get it free. Well, somebody's got to pay.
Yeah, it's actually something that came out of all people, Rick Siegel during his interview, because he was talking about the fact that he said the big secret of FidoNet was that you had a lot of people who were really benefiting from it, and you had all these poor guys at the top who were just getting their bills absolutely hammered because of all the traffic that's going through. And some of them are trying to make up for it, but there's just no, it's not. I guess from the bottom part, it seems that they've said, the net is so, the FidoNet's so well designed, it doesn't cost anybody anything. But in fact, it is costing some people.
Well, but there are a lot of big companies with nodes on the net with corporate telephones
There were some
that were pumping the node list all over the place, and of course all those expenses were buried. So
yeah, that's the thing was that, like I said, that's what was so interesting was, Rick was talking about the idea that when you become a nonprofit, you can accept donations of hardware.
correct. You can accept money, you can accept, and you can write it off, and as long as it's a certain, you have to keep control, you have to keep accounting, you have to file paperwork, but we were trying to do it the right way.
In '87, I guess it was, I went to a place in Ohio for a company, I won't mention their name. It was a Fortune 100 corporation. And their mainframe guys had a proposal on the table to send electronic mail, files, and messaging between 6 plants that they had nationwide. And they were going to spend, to develop the software to do this, they were going to spend $1.5 million and a 3-year rollout. And I took the MIS guy aside. I said, there's a program here for $59.95 called CDOG. And if we run it on top of FighterNet, in the FighterNet system, and give you guys create you a private node list, we can do this all for less than $1,000 per plant. And he went back in the room and shut the meeting down. Because what these two gentlemen had accomplished with the node list structure, and Tom Henderson had a lot to do with formulating the ideas, okay? But what Ken did and what Ben did was to create essentially a multinational messaging tool that was 10 to 15 years ahead of anything that anybody in the mainframe world had even begun to believe could exist, and they were doing it all at the garage PC level.
That was the thing. Huge network systems did exist. McDonnell Douglas had a network system operated at high speed with using both T-line coax and satellites, tying all of the McDonnell Douglas facilities, St. Louis, Long Beach, Wichita, Tulsa, that we're all tied together, and it can be done. It costs millions to do it at that rate. We did it on a shoestring.
And better.
Yeah. We also had a tremendous amount of cooperation from U.S. Robotics in the beginning. Those people weren't stupid. They realized that every single person who set one of these up would go out and buy first a 1200 baud modem, then a 9600 baud modem, and who even knew what was beyond that. But they worked with us. Their engineers would answer the telephone. They admitted that some of what we were doing was ahead of what they understood, and we were getting better throughput and better exchange between our systems than they were. And Hayes was obnoxious.
Hayes had a Fido node on the net. They were using a USR modem to keep it online.
Right.
Well, but see, and you have to give the USR guys credit for marketing.
Oh, yeah.
See, at that time, now I was the representative to the technical standards group for the CCITT, which was the French group who was going to standardize these modems. And nobody could agree on a 9600 baud standard. There were 5 good contenders, and at the bottom of the heap was the HST. I mean, it wasn't even in the running to begin with.
And it wasn't 9600 baud, it was 14.4.
Yeah. Some days.
Right.
Some days.
Right.
But it was non-standard. The state diagrams for the protocols and how the things were supposed to talk to each other, it ignored them completely. Ventel was on one base. There were several others that were all trying. Reykjavik were trying to be, and some of those were just outstanding technology. What HST did is they went out and said, "Okay, guys, looky here. Y'all are paying these tremendous phone bills," and we were paying obnoxious phone bills. If you put one of our HST modems on and talk to other HSTs, even if it doesn't become the standard, okay, in the 6 months that the French are going to screw around with this, you'll have paid for the modem in your phone bill. And so the modems became essentially free, and they stocked every FidoNet sysop in the country with an HST, and that became the standard because it was in fact already in place, and the French rolled over.
Yeah.
They stole the march by recognizing that we're a market to contend with.
We tested them on the voice network, and nothing else had really operated on the voice network.
Yeah.
Mentioning the other, the only other factoid, I'm just trying to remember these just in sort of, but at the meeting, see, I keep the meeting that I call the anarchy meeting simply because that's Tom's speech. It's not in Colorado, is it? I think it's in East Coast, or he's not sure. I mean,
There were more than one meeting.
Yeah,
The second
86 was in Colorado, 87 I think was in Washington.
right. I think it's the
I've
one in
forgotten where
Washington.
88 was.
It's the one where he gets the award for being such a great guy. The
Ohio.
is that it? I mean, there's one where Tom gets an award.
Wasn't that Ohio?
Yeah.
That
It's
was
an
the
award.
It wasn't the first year. It had to
The
be
Cincinnati
second year.
meeting. It was the Cincinnati meeting. Yeah.
I wasn't there.
Yeah, you
were there.
Was I there?
Yeah, you were there.
Okay.
Absolutely, you were there.
I don't remember.
That was the meeting when they decided to have the up or down vote on IFNA, and non-votes counted as no votes.
Okay.
And it still passed.
That was at Cincinnati.
And it still passed.
Yeah.
No, it failed. Failed horribly.
Yeah. They didn't want. Nobody wanted IFNA.
Yeah. The thing that drove Tom nuts, of course, when he mentions it, was that he was told that that in his mind he thought that IFNA was going to be, I don't know how you would put it, like the classic egalitarian gentleman farmer kind of a deal, where you were part of IFNA, helping with the organization, but you weren't. You were just the guy who was helping with that, just like there might be a committee.
I would have been perfectly happy had it been a support organization.
Right.
But no, people wanted it to be. They wanted it to be a user group and tied to FidoNet. Either that or they didn't want it to exist.
Right. He said he walked into the thing and that the seats for the seats for the IFNA board were higher than the others. They were on
a raised dais.
On a raised dais. And Tom can't remember if he got on it or if he didn't, but he did something where he was with it and he was with someone else and he was like, "What are we doing?" And that was what started him on this.
Yeah, he was not a happy man that weekend.
Of course, he wasn't. As I recall, he wasn't. And I don't want to put this politely, but I think that was a weekend that Tom had more of a chemical imbalance than usual.
That may be. As for the raised dais, nobody did that deliberately. It's just the way the hotel set things up.
And that's what Ezra was at that one, or Ezra was in Colorado Springs?
I don't remember him being in Colorado Springs.
Okay, then Ezra must have been in.
But he must have been because I mentioned him in that history.
Yeah, as the canon, they showed up has put it, it was that, Tom, that big speeches, award given to Tom. Tom stands up and gives a speech, which is transcribed in one of the Fido News. And that it's always described as being that the chaos that then ensues is usually described with you trying desperately to calm everyone down.
But that happened 2 years in a row.
Okay.
Or three?
Or three, yeah, at least twice.
Yeah.
Cincinnati was the last big meeting.
Yeah.
And that was one, and the part of the problem with that is that Fido at that point had contenders. There was Opus, and that was the first meeting that when Wagner showed up and started to be, well, we have this Texas solution to things, and if the California contingent, and if the California contingent doesn't play ball, why we'll just run with the Penguin.
Well, but they were also burying us with Echo Mail.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were burying us. You know what? You're familiar with this whole topic? I mean, Wynn wrote this package called Echo Mail, which allowed essentially.
He didn't write that, did he?
It was
George Stanislav
he implemented.
No.
George wrote it for him.
No.
Well, how was Wynn
No, it
involved?
was another guy, entirely different. A very unassuming fellow, kind of shy. I think he only came to one conference and wouldn't hardly talk to anybody.
There is a separate creator of Echo Mail,
Yeah.
but Opus.
And I can't think of his name.
But I think Opus ran Echo Mail, and I don't know.
Right.
Everybody ran
Yeah.
Echo Mail.
FidoNet, it just buried us. I mean, we couldn't handle the traffic.
Now, the difficulty with Echo Mail is you had to be very careful, or you created a lot of duplicates on messages. And they could grow exponentially, depending on... If you forward a message to a board that's already seen that message, he just takes it and puts it on again. And next time he sends stuff out, he sends it out again. And
It was a nightmare.
Tom created a system which he
Arc
called Group Mail
Well, group mail, you're right.
that
Cleaned
prevented that. Prevented it completely. And because it was Tom Henderson's, nobody would have anything to do with it. And that's the only reason they wouldn't have anything to do with it, because it was far superior technology. And everybody admitted it was superior technology, but it was Henderson's.
And I mean, this is the guy who took the mantle up for FidoNews when nobody wanted it.
He did a lot of things when nobody else would do them. And he did them extraordinarily well, and he got reamed for it every time because not a lot of people understood his sense of humor. And he had a nasty penchant for poking holes in people's stories. If they would
And
come
he
in,
did not suffer fools gladly.
No. If you said something that was stupid and hadn't been well thought out, then Tom was right up there to say, gee, that was stupid. You didn't think that out very well.
Yeah, right in your face.
And the nasty thing, the reason people really hated it is because when they went back and thought about it again, he was right more times than not. You know, and the fact is the one-eyed man is only king until they catch him. You know, and Tom was easily caught.
I hope we're not making you sad, Ken.
No, I mean, Tom Henderson helped me many times, and
I regard Tom Henderson as a friend.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's, you know.
I've stayed at his house more than once.
He's been a guest in my home more than once, and Irene too.
I haven't learned to read your face yet, so I don't want to make you sad. I'm just bringing up
No.
there's all sorts of, like, these are, some of the things that I'm bringing up are just perceptions that I have based on the different interviews. Like, for instance, when I interviewed Tim Pozar cared about making sure that I knew three things, and the three things were, it was his idea to call it IFNA instead of IFA, because IFA was another organization. That was one. The other one was how important UUCP was to FidoNet. And the third one was the work he did or the work that FidoNet did getting mail to South Africa, because he thought that was a really cool thing. Anyway, that was, like, for instance, Tim Pozar's three things, none of which seem to overlap with you. But, those kind of things.
Well, the African thing is well known, I thought.
Yeah.
I mean, they still use FidoNet in Africa only because the implementation is so inexpensive. In some portions of Africa, it was the only thing they could afford. Mm-hmm. So it's still operating over there.
Still works on a shoestring.
How much time will I have on tape still?
On this particular tape, we have 15 minutes.
Uh-huh.
On tapes that I have here, about 30 hours.
The other,
We'll stop before then.
the other one was during the Arab-Israeli wars.
I'm just wondering when the next
I
break
mean,
was coming.
they were getting news out on FidoNet much faster, and able to get it out from the field, and not just in that war, but a number of places in the Middle East. It was amazing, some of the stories that I was told as to the way they were using FidoNet in the field in order to. They were using points.
Yeah, Tom was very proud of the fact that he found out that it was a bargaining chip during Kosovo, because they kept shutting down newspapers.
Right.
They found that the newspapers switched to FidoNet and said, screw you,
Yeah.
we can pass news so fast that the phone system doesn't even register because it could be in and out in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And, and then they were able to bargain with the government to allow them to publish, because otherwise they were just going to go free without them. And say, screw you, and they screw you, we have FidoNet. So yeah, no, that's, I mean, you know, certainly.
It's hard to think of all of those battles that we had and all the vitriol that went back and forth and the name calling and seeing that in the end result 20 years later that we made a contribution to world peace.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? That is just amazing.
Now that's
that
irony.
Is just remarkable. Yeah.
One of the things that always fascinated me, that no matter how hot the flames got on any of the echoes, there was always one calm voice of reason. And that was a fellow that called himself Old Frog. Old Frog.
Yeah. Well,
And he would make the most reasoned arguments that were obviously true and that everyone rejected out of hand. And it didn't bother him. He came back the next day with another reasoned argument.
Don't worry, the video isn't that sensitive. It won't pick up your blushing.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of those people could read. I think they just could write.
Well, that's the thing. One of the, I gave some sort of a talk, kind of a writing thing about, you know, my experiences of what BBSs were and everything else. And one of my things I described was communication breeds contempt. That one of the side problems that you have is the more people you start to shove together without any controls, all it takes is just a few people not getting along and suddenly it just hits like a virus.
well, there were two rules that were established, and they're very good rules. And you know, when I talk to people and I talk to groups today, and I still teach groups about communication skills, and I still promote these two rules. Don't be easily annoyed, and don't be overly annoying. And that's what that's what I tried to keep.
Did you coin those or did Tom?
I think Henderson did.
Yeah, I think they were in Fido News. Yeah.
Yeah. Henderson coined them, and I lived them.
Don't be too easily annoyed, and don't be over annoying. I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. This is 20 years later, and the internet is coming out with a lot of the same things that we were seeing and experiencing with all this traffic and communications and echo mail and all this.
Oh, we
stuff,
invented the term flames.
Yeah. All those terms.
Yeah,
all those symbols, all those terms.
You see them on
we
Usenet
and
Usenet. We were,
Actually, I think Usenet invented the term.
I think we had flamers before Usenet.
Maybe.
Somebody bridged Usenet in.
Tim
Posar
And so then
was involved in the development
and his partner.
The guy who took over after me worked with Posar.
Went to work with Phil Becker.
Oh, yeah.
Bob Hartman.
Bob Hartman.
He interviewed with Phil Becker. It was him and Phil Becker. And he's the reason I got in touch with Wynn, actually, and Vince. He was like, did you talk to everyone? I'm like, well, Wynn doesn't answer calls. He's like, oh. And like 2 days later, I get mail from Wynn, like, what? You know, basically, well, like...
That was the whole message?
Essentially, yeah. Essentially, because it was from, like, it was like Bob Hartman going, hey, Wynn, there's this guy at the thing. He goes, okay, what? And I said, well, I'd like to come and interview. And he was like, okay. And like 2 months later, he gave me the address so I could find him. And, yep.
He's still in Texas?
Yes. Still in Dallas, still in Texas. And still quite not talkative. I don't know what his name is.
Originally, Echo Mail started right in that vicinity.
That was one of those.
It was the hotbed of Echo Mail down there.
Yeah, there was some, anyway, there was someone I was talking to talking about the Dallas people. There's a few people who talked about that. The Dallas people had a very specific idea of things, and that and I talked to somebody from Oklahoma. Might have been Grennan, but it might have been someone else actually, who was also like very unhappy that IFNA shut down. they had a perception of IFNA that they were going to be able to take IFNA to the next level. I don't know where this came from. This is one of these things you look up.
Hey, look, I was so happy to see it go, and yet I just got burned out. It just was.
Well, I remember that there was a vote. I mean, there was like a vote to FidoNet.
Yeah, that's
Well,
the
that
one I
was the
mentioned
one in
earlier.
Colorado Springs.
But the rules were ridiculous. FidoNet was nothing if it was not in general apathetic. And when you say we're going to get a vote from all of the sysops in FidoNet, you can figure maybe 20% are going to actually do it.
Well, the
But
other thing that
the
happened is
rules-
it increased the amount, the contributions to IFNA.
The rules on the
Like you
vote,
to go away.
the rules on the vote was a majority of all sysops had to vote yes. Not a majority of all voting sysops, but a majority of all sysops had to vote yes. So a non-vote was a no vote.
Yeah, it was insane.
I mean, I found, because IFNA officially shuts down relatively soon.
89, I think.
Compared to when, I'm still seeing, there's something that Tom did after IFNA. Because Rick Siegel talked about it. It was the thing where they all dressed up in crowns and robes.
You keep saying Tom and IFNA. Tom had nothing but the words for IFNA.
Which Tom
I did
is he
all the
talking
work.
about?
I took all the, I set up, I actually got the 501c3. I had the checkbook. I had the P.O. box. I took the whole box and we sent it to a lawyer out in Hawaii. And so I said, look guys, you guys want to complain? All the bills and all the statements are out in Hawaii. You want to make calls out there? Fine. In the meantime, leave me alone.
I think you're.
But then after that, huh?
I think he's talking about alternate.
Yeah, he is.
He's talking about
confusing-
Tom Henderson,
He's
not Tom-
confusing Tom Henderson with TJ.
Oh, you're talking about Jennings.
I'm talking, okay,
Tom Henderson created alternate.
right. No, I understand.
well,
No, you are
and
right
the-
in terms of, I am,
You're confusing terms.
No, I did.
I
And
get
the
it.
Intergalactic Sysop Society
Alliance.
Alliance, right. ISA, Intergalactic Sysop
I still had a
But that
card
was-
in my wallet from them until 2 weeks ago.
That was afterwards, right?
Huh?
That was after.
was a parallel development.
Or at the same time.
Yeah,
Okay.
that happened about,
Yeah.
89.
just about the time IFNA was being voted down, maybe
Okay.
before then, because
All right.
it already existed in Cincinnati.
Yeah. And by that time, I was burned
Yeah,
out. I
we
didn't
had-
care what those guys did.
Alternate, we had our own meeting in Cincinnati.
We did it because we saw that IFNA was headed.
Right. Right.
And we wanted to have something to replace it. So Henderson and I talked about, and it was one of those notes that Benjamin was referring to where I'm trying to find a sense of reason and sanity. And I said, well, okay, if we're going to take the high road, okay, what are we supposed to do with these systems? And so we started out, and we kind of created a code of conduct, which IFNA never had. And then from the code of conduct, we said, well, this is kind of like a code, and we ended up with a code of chivalry for the electronic age.
Yeah, actually, it was modeled on medieval heraldry.
Right, and it was the Alliance Long Distance Telephonic Exchange Relay, AlterNet.
I remember all that.
And Benjamin here was the Grand Wizard.
Yeah. These guys were so heavy back at that point that I just didn't.
We had an
play.
Archduke.
Archduke
I
Carl.
wasn't.
Carl was the
I
last.
wasn't
Initially it was
interested in it.
some woman whose name escapes me. And then Carl took over
Right.
when she
Yeah, I don't wish to
revealed she was...
downplay your part and contribution in the IFNA story. I keep mentioning it because the one who keeps getting himself most embroiled is Tom in discussing things, Tom Henderson.
Oh, I know that.
But I'm not. I don't want to.
But I had forgotten about all this, and this was really afterwards.
Right.
It was after we did everything we possibly could to keep it.
IFNA was a sinking ship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those of us that believed that there was still
A
something
need for something.
to come out of it, okay, developed alternate. and the notion of alternate was that you could be an alternate and in IFNA if you chose. But if you didn't want to be in IFNA, and you felt morally opposed to it, or religious reasons, whatever the reason, you could still be an alternate, provided, see, and here's the catch, provided you subscribe to the code of conduct. And the whole code of conduct thing was based on the notion that we were not going to have any more Mikeys, we were not going to have any more of the things that had killed Ken.
Right.
We were going to cut off at the roots so that didn't happen to the rest of us.
Right.
We learned from the example. Ken sacrificed himself. We tried to learn from that.
Yeah. I didn't want anything to do with any of that.
Yeah, well,
At that point,
yeah.
it's interesting.
You're taking out the demeanor of a veteran.
I didn't even pay any attention to what they were doing.
I just mean the whole thing, Ken, because I knew that a couple people really got. I mean, there's an amusing thing reading it 15 years later and watching the battles, but it's another thing to live through it, and that's the hardest thing to understand. It sounds to me like you were one of the people who really got pinched.
Yeah, well, I survived until we split into zones, and we were, once we got into zones, it got to be fascinating, because then you heard about the European battles, and you heard about the guys in Sweden, and
it was in '88 that the attacks started to get personal. At that time, I had the technical reins well in hand. And so I was dealing with the people that were writing software that was almost exactly like, but not really the same as, and we're trying to get their software story told. And, all right, make this work, make this work, make this work, these are the things. And we had that all ironed out, so they couldn't complain about that much. So what the dissenters did is that they began to make personal attacks at Ken. And I don't know if Ken wants to talk about it much, but I
got my share too.
Here's what I'm sure of. I am sure that when Ken went to the Cincinnati, I understand why Ken would not remember the Cincinnati meeting. He was vilified and taken to task for stuff that he had never done, and people called him to his face, got in his face and shouted and called him names and things that we wouldn't want to put on a tape. And there were a couple times that I think Sally took him aside and calmed him down because he was going to. I don't know why he didn't punch somebody out. I probably would have, except they were afraid to hit me. I don't blame you for not remembering.
Well, yeah, I mean, they wanted to know what I was doing, and they wanted to know what where the money was going, and all this, and by telling the truth, I got annihilated. I'd have been better lying to them.
Yeah. At least you'd have had something. You felt good about the lie. So Tom Henderson and Ben Baker and I developed this idea for alternate, and I sold it. I was the first person to officially. I was his own coordinator, and I resigned from. I could not fully support alternate. And still support being a coordinator for FighterNet. So I resigned from IFNA, and I was one of the elected people at that time. I resigned from IFNA in a long letter. I'm sure it's published somewhere because
I'm sure they all are.
And I resigned and said, and the end of it was "Long live the Alliance," because there was some criticism about whether I could believe in the Alliance and still hold my position with IFNA. And so I resigned from that. And we did the Alliance thing for a couple more years, trying to hold it all together.
Now, once I got into the Alliance, I dropped out of FighterNet entirely. I was in the Alliance for a while. Somewhere around 1989, I think. My modem broke. We get a lot of electrical storms around here, and I had a lightning strike take out my modem. And at the time, I did not have the wherewithal to go out and get a replacement modem. So I just kind of let it slide. And then after about 3 weeks, I began to realize I didn't miss it. So I just didn't bother to get a modem until after I got laid off at Mackin and tried to go into the consulting business. And then I had to, because the business required it.
And he brought me down here to help him get started. Little did I know I'd end up living here.
At the meeting in St. Louis, my wife and I adopted an infant, and he's the one who Henderson coined Fido Baby and is now 18. But at the point that I got out, I just decided to reacquaint myself with my wife and my kids and just pull back immediately because, I was spending a hell of a lot of time doing a lot of this. For all of what these people were accusing me of doing nothing, it literally, consumed every bit of free time I had. And I know Ben probably felt the same way.
You want to put in your 2 cents worth?
But we felt like we were really contributing something, and we really felt like we were contributing something that was positive and good and had a lasting effect. And I guess it has, since we're now talking about it this many years later. But
part of the reason I think that all of that happened, Ken, as I think about it, and this is a time I have thought about it in 10 years, is that the software and the techniques that were developed by you and Ben, the algorithms and the notions of how to do things, were so simple in their execution after the sweat of working them out, that it became a common belief that anybody could do this if they spend a couple hours a day at it. Instead of recognizing that was the end of the line.
Make-NL made it relatively easy to maintain the node list.
Yeah, but I'm sure there were
even
big
with
companies.
10,000 nodes.
There were big companies trying to do things like this that couldn't.
Absolutely.
And here we did it with a bunch of amateurs with diverse.
The Q-sort algorithm that Ben put together is still the neatest sort program out there.
Okay, that's this tape. So you wanted to break it.
Yeah. I'm going to go out and join the ladies.
Okay.
Do you want to talk to him a while, or you know?
I don't have much to say.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good. I'm glad.
I'm fine either way. This actually works out really great with the three of you.
Okay.
Hey.
When I interview three people, they don't sit so close together, and it's a real pain. So I got to move the car.
All right. So that's solved that
That's going
problem.
very well. I mean, based on my knowledge of interviews, I would say you guys have about an hour left in yourself before you'll burn out. This will kill you. But and that's fine.
Yeah, we can let it burn out.
Who knows? You may be able to fill up another tape.
Oh, I mean, that's what I mean. I'm all for it. So.